Live on national TV, Jasmine Crockett exposed a shocking connection involving Trump, Melania, and foreign donors. And Karoline just sat there, stunned. The camera had been rolling for exactly 17 minutes. What was supposed to be a tense, well-rehearsed segment on campaign finance reform had started as expected. Tight smiles, polished talking points, and the kind of rehearsed jabs you'd expect between rising stars from opposite ends of the political spectrum. But then, Jasmine shifted in her seat, and instead of responding to Karoline's latest swipe about reckless spending under progressive policies, she adjusted her mic, glanced once at the host, and leaned slightly forward. "I find it interesting," Jasmine began, voice steady but colder than her usual tone, "that we're here talking about campaign finance. Yet no one wants to mention the donor money tied to the Mar-a-Lago gala in 2022, or how a foreign shell company funneled $500,000 into that event, with Melania Trump hosting personally." Silence. Not the usual TV silence, the kind that makes producers twitch and hosts jump in to fill dead air, but the kind that drops the room into disbelief. The kind that doesn't feel rehearsed or coordinated, the kind that makes your stomach clench, even if you're not sure why yet. Karoline blinked. Once, twice. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. "Again? You want to repeat that?" The host, an older man with a calm radio voice, finally asked, trying to diffuse the tension. Jasmine didn't blink. "I said the money was traced to a Beijing-linked holding group operating under the name Sable Bay Consulting. The same group whose executive board attended that private dinner at Mar-a-Lago. 2 of them aren't even U.S. citizens. One's under quiet investigation in Europe for laundering. Now, it wasn't just the panel that was quiet, the control room, the newsroom outside, the crew in the back. Everyone had stopped moving. The cameraman, seasoned and unflappable, slowly zoomed in. Almost instinctively, Karoline leaned in, her voice tight. "That's a reckless accusation." Jasmine raised a brow. "Is it reckless if I have documents signed by a Trump legal aid authorizing the payments? Or is it just inconvenient?" There was a beat, a full second where no one dared interrupt. Karoline's composure cracked. Her chin dipped slightly, eyes scanning the desk in front of her, as if looking for a page that could save her. Her fingers fumbled with the pen she hadn't touched all show. The host cleared his throat. "All right, let's stay on topic." "I am on topic," Jasmine cut in. "This is campaign finance. This is exactly what it looks like when billionaires influence elections through backdoor channels, and no one's talking about it because the names involved are too big, too powerful." Karoline's voice finally came back, but it lacked its usual bite. "That's not verified. You're throwing bombs without evidence." But Jasmine was ready. "Then ask your team why Karoline's own press secretary flagged this 2 months ago. Ask why they've been quietly deleting tweets that mentioned that gala." The host tried to pivot. He really did. But the damage was done. You could feel it. Viewers at home weren't listening to policy anymore. They were watching faces, reading body language, noticing the shift, the hesitations. On Twitter, clips started, going up within 10 minutes. Crockett goes nuclear. Leavitt silenced on live TV. Hashtags followed. People were freeze-framing Karoline's expression, comparing it to political moments from decades ago. The kind of moment that doesn't just go viral. It embeds itself in the cultural memory because it wasn't just what was said. It was how real it felt. No handlers, no earpieces feeding lines, just 2 people at a table, one with a secret, the other refusing to hold it any longer. But what led to that moment wasn't just one story. It was layers deep. 3 days earlier, Jasmine Crockett sat alone in her small DC office, long after her staff had left for the night. Her jacket was off, sleeves rolled up, and her eyes hadn't moved from the folder on her desk for the better part of an hour. The man who handed it to her didn't give a name, just credentials, a clipboard, and a quiet warning. "You didn't get this." From me, she hadn't even asked how he got past security. That would come later. For now, she was staring at something most politicians spend their careers avoiding. Paper. Real paper, the kind that can't be deleted with a tweet or twisted in a press release. It wasn't just one memo or a suspicious bank statement. It was a timeline. It traced a series of campaign donations, over $2 million, made through obscure LLCs with no real business activity. One of the donors was an antique rug wholesaler in Nevada. Another, a defunct juice company in Sarasota that hadn't filed taxes in 7 years. And every single one had transferred money days before a private fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago, hosted by Melania Trump and attended by 2 men from overseas whose names Jasmine had only seen before in briefing documents tied to foreign intelligence watch lists. The worst part? It was clean. Too clean. Carefully layered with just enough legality to escape most scrutiny. Jasmine pushed the chair back, walked to the window, and stared out at the street below. She didn't feel powerful at that moment. She felt boxed in. Like if she moved too quickly, the whole thing would blow up in her face. If she moved too slowly, it would disappear before anyone ever saw it. Her phone buzzed. It was Kendra, her chief of staff. "Still at the office?" Kendra asked. Already knowing the answer, "I thought you were taking tonight off." "I was," Jasmine said, glancing back at the folder. But something came up. There was a pause on the line. Kendra always knew when her boss wasn't telling the whole story. "Is this about the thing we weren't supposed to get involved in?" Jasmine didn't respond right away. "I think it's bigger than we thought," she finally said. "And if I'm right, it's going to rattle more than a few cages. Are you planning to go public?" Another long pause. "I'm going on that panel Thursday with Leavitt," Jasmine said slowly. "I might say something." Kendra exhaled hard. "Jazz, you say something like this out loud and it's gonna land like a hammer. We're not just poking the bear, we're dragging it into daylight. You sure that's the move?" But Jasmine already knew what her gut had decided. "They think people like me don't have the guts to say it on camera," she replied. "I've had enough of that." She hung up, walked back to the desk and flipped to a page near the back. A single signature. Not Trump's, not Melania's, but someone connected, someone whose name had popped up in news stories 2 years ago and then quietly vanished. That's what made her stomach turn the most. Not the money, not even the names, but the silence. The way something so bold could live in the dark because no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. That night, she didn't sleep much. She rehearsed nothing. She didn't tell her staff. She didn't even ask for a fact check, because she knew if she did, someone might talk her out of it. But once those pages hit her desk, she knew silence was no longer an option. Thursday morning in Sacramento was warm, cloudless, and completely unremarkable. At least on the surface. Inside the studio, though, nerves were high. Not because anything unusual had happened, but because live TV always brings a certain charge. The kind you don't talk about but you feel in your gut the moment you pass the makeup chair. Jasmine arrived without her usual entourage. No publicist, no assistant trailing her with a phone full of alerts. Just her, a black notebook tucked under her arm, and a coffee she never took more than 2 sips from. Across the green room, Karoline Leavitt sat in a crisp cream blazer, earbuds in, nodding along to whatever her comms director was saying through the wire. Her posture was perfect, her smile rehearsed. She glanced up just once as Jasmine walked in. No words, just a flicker of recognition before she went back to scrolling. Her phone. The host, Barry Klein, had been moderating live panels for nearly 20 years. Nothing surprised him anymore. Not the fake friendships, not the sudden on-air outbursts, not the post-show spin. He greeted both women with the same dry familiarity. Ladies 3 minutes, same format as usual. Openers one-on-one, then closing remarks. Keep it civil or at ease. Least pretend for the viewers. He winked. Jasmine didn't smile back. Backstage, one of the interns tested audio levels while the floor director ran final checks. Barry stepped aside to powder his forehead. Karoline rehearsed a talking point about democratic hypocrisy on budget spending. Jasmine sat silently, eyes fixed on the floor, flipping the pages in her notebook with deliberate slowness. Nobody asked what she was looking at. The panel producer, Claire, leaned in from the wings. "You're good on mic, Jasmine. If you want to hit healthcare hard, do it early. Karoline's coming in hot on that." Jasmine nodded once, eyes not leaving the page, but she wasn't thinking about healthcare. She was thinking about the gala photo buried at the bottom of her folder. The one showing a handshake between a man from Shenzhen and a man who used to serve on the Trump campaign finance committee. The picture had been taken on the back patio at Mar-a-Lago. Champagne, crisp suits, the gold trim of the table reflecting sunlight, and no one had ever asked who paid for that table. A stagehand signaled 1 minute. Barry took his seat at center stage. Karoline slid smoothly into her chair, smiling as the cameras powered up. Jasmine followed, placing her notebook on the desk beside her. She didn't open it. Instead, she looked directly into the camera. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't calm either. It was something in between, like standing on the edge of a cliff and knowing it's too late to turn back, but also knowing your voice might echo if you yell loud enough. The director's voice came over the earpieces. "And we live in 5, 4, 3, 2. The theme music faded. Barry launched into the intro. The graphics danced across the screen, and suddenly, it was all happening. Another live debate, another morning of talking heads and split-screen arguments. To most viewers at home, this was routine. But behind the scenes, nobody knew Jasmine had a different plan. Karoline opened with her usual fire. She hit the budget, she hit border policy, she tossed in a jab about the left losing touch with real Americans. Barry gave Jasmine the floor. She smiled once, almost like muscle memory. "Karoline," she said casually, "you're great at talking about spending, unless we're talking about private money laundering through political galas." Karoline blinked. The room didn't shift immediately, but Jasmine could feel it. She cracked the surface. She could already sense the crew glancing at each other. One of the producers dropped her pen. Barry looked up from his notes. The live mic was still on. But once the red light turned on, there was no going back. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The words did all the work. Karoline's face didn't fall apart all at once. It shifted in pieces. First her brows twitched. Confusion. Then her mouth opened as if to interrupt, but nothing came out. Then came the attempt to regain control. She turned slightly toward the host, looking for an out. None came. "Could you clarify that?" Barry asked, doing his best to sound neutral, though the tension in his voice cracked through. Jasmine nodded. "Absolutely. I'm referring to the private fundraising gala held on April 23, 2022 at Mar-a-Lago. A guest list of 72.49 donations were processed within 6 days of that night, all under $250,000. None of them traceable to legitimate U.S. businesses." Karoline straightened in her chair, lips pressed thin. "That's nonsense. That's not verified by any credible source." "Actually," Jasmine cut in, "your own party's Financial Oversight Committee opened a quiet internal review last fall. You should check your inbox. Or better yet, ask your communications director why they sent out an internal memo, urging staff to avoid any mention of foreign-connected contributions." "I've seen it." The control room fed Barry a note through his earpiece. He sat up straighter, adjusted his tie. "We weren't made aware of any of these claims before the broadcast," he said quickly. Jasmine turned to him. "You weren't supposed to be." A hush spread through the panel like a slow-moving fog. One of the producers mouthed, "Cut to commercial." But Barry didn't flinch. He knew. The clip was already being recorded by hundreds of DVRs and screen grabs. Cutting away now would only fuel the storm. Karoline finally found her voice. These are unsubstantiated, borderline slanderous. You're throwing out accusations like it's performance art. Jasmine shrugged. Then sue me. The silence that followed wasn't the awkward kind. It was the kind people lean into. You're implying the former president and first lady knowingly participated in illegal campaign finance activity, Karoline added, her voice brittle now. I'm not implying anything, Jasmine replied. I'm stating what's already written, signed, sealed, and reviewed by 2 legal analysts who used to work for your own administration. At that, Barry leaned forward. Do you have those documents with you? Jasmine tapped her notebook once. I didn't come here to wave paper. I came here because silence has a cost, and I'm done letting people pretend that money like this just shows up. Karoline's face was still. Too still. She had one of 2 options, deny it forcefully or pivot hard. But she hesitated, and in that hesitation, everything changed. The live comment feed below the stream started flooding. Is this real? She came with receipts? What's Karoline looking for? Her dignity? By the time the segment ended just 2 minutes later, Jasmine had turned the conversation into something else entirely. Barry wrapped the panel as gracefully as he could, thanking both guests, but nobody was listening anymore. The screen cut back to commercials, but the internet didn't. Within minutes, clips flooded TikTok and X. Hashtags trended in less than an hour. One still image, Karoline with her hand half raised, eyes blinking fast, mouth open but speechless, was posted with the caption, "When you realize she did her homework." At the network headquarters, phones rang off the hook. Producers were pulled into emergency meetings. Editors were asked to prepare segments for the evening news, debating whether to show the full clip or chop it for brevity. Lawyers reviewed the broadcast twice. Jasmine left the studio without waiting for post-show banter. She didn't speak to reporters waiting outside. She didn't wave at the camera. She walked straight to the black sedan waiting at the corner and sat in the back seat, her notebook clutched tight in her lap. Her phone was vibrating nonstop, but she didn't answer. Not yet. But it wasn't just political. The fallout hit personal. Lives too. Jasmine barely made it back to her apartment before the first wave hit. By the time she kicked off her shoes and dropped her bag, 3 networks had requested follow-up interviews. Her voicemail was already full. Texts came in non-stop. Some from reporters she hadn't spoken to in years, others from colleagues she hadn't heard from in months. But it wasn't just the press. Her mother called twice. Her younger brother texted, "You broke the internet. Good luck," at Thanksgiving. Even her college roommate from Tallahassee messaged her a screenshot of the clip with nothing but the word girl. She sat on the couch and stared at the TV, not even listening. Every station had her face up in a split screen with Karoline. Every panel was asking the same thing. Did Jasmine go too far? Or did she finally say what others were too afraid to? Meanwhile, Karoline's office released a statement. It was short, dismissive. It called Jasmine's remarks irresponsible and a desperate attempt to distract from her own record. But people weren't buying it. What hit viewers wasn't the content alone. It was the rawness of the exchange. The way Jasmine didn't flinch, the way Karoline, who was known for always having a counter ready, had faltered in full view of millions. The memes didn't stop. One had Karoline edited into an empty classroom with the caption, "When you forget to study and the test is televised." Another showed Jasmine in sunglasses, walking away from a cartoon explosion. Some were ridiculous, some were ruthless. All of them pointed in the same direction. Something real had just happened, but while social media mocked and debated, the people behind the curtain scrambled. At party headquarters in Tallahassee, communications directors held closed-door calls with legal consultants. The finance team combed through months of donor data, trying to assess how much of what Jasmine said might actually hold weight. A leak? A rogue staffer? A foreign link that hadn't been flagged? Nobody had expected this. And back at the studio, producers were in a state of quiet panic. Claire, the lead panel producer, sat at her desk watching the clip for the 8th time. She didn't even raise her voice, she muttered to herself. She just dropped it. Barry, the host, leaned in her doorway. "You think it's real?" Claire didn't answer right away. She didn't have to. They both knew it didn't matter. The audience thought it was real. That was enough. By the next morning, Jasmine's office had received nearly 4,000 emails. Half were praise, half were attacks. All were loud. Kendra, her chief of staff, burst through the door at 8 a.m. with a cup of coffee and a look of alarm. "Okay," she said, not bothering with good morning. "The networks are asking for comments. Do we confirm you had documents, or keep it vague?" Jasmine was calm. "Let them talk. If they want proof, they'll dig. You're being called everything from reckless truth-teller to enemy of the party," Kendra added. "Also, Karoline's people are calling around. They want to know what else you have." "Good," Jasmine said. "Let them wonder." But not everyone was cheering. An older congressman from Louisiana left a voicemail on her office line, warning her to tread carefully. A well-known lobbyist hinted that donors were nervous about your tone. One of her close colleagues even texted, "You could have gone through internal channels. Why blow it up like that?" To which Jasmine replied, "Because those channels are where truth goes to die." She hadn't slept much, but she didn't feel tired. She felt clear. She didn't drop that bombshell for fame. She didn't want attention. She just knew what silence cost. She'd seen it before at City Hall, during court hearings, in community meetings, where people whispered what they were too scared to say out loud. Now the truth was out, and whether it stuck or slipped away would depend on what people did next. But the real storm was still ahead, because people started digging. 3 days after the broadcast, a freelance investigative journalist named Hector Padilla sat hunched over a folding table in a small co-working space just off Speedway Boulevard in Tucson, Arizona. He hadn't planned on chasing this story, but ever since the clip of Jasmine Crockett had gone viral, something about her calm delivery nagged at him, not the performance. He wasn't interested in drama, he was interested in patterns. And what she said? It lined up too neatly with a file he'd been building on and off for over a year. It started with one donation, a $210,000 check wired from a Las Vegas-based import company that hadn't shipped anything in nearly a decade. Then, another $195,000 from a car rental service registered to a vacant lot in Phoenix. Neither company had any political history, yet both made maximum contributions to a super PAC affiliated with the Trump-aligned Patriot Restoration Coalition. Hector had flagged them before, but editors weren't biting. No hard proof, they said. No smoking gun, until Jasmine said Sable Bay Consulting. He hadn't heard that name in months, but the moment it came out of her mouth, something clicked. He dug back into the archive. Sure enough, Sable Bay had appeared, briefly in a batch of documents from a 2022 whistleblower case, buried deep, almost invisible. But it was there, listed as a third-party logistics intermediary for a luxury shipping group based in Macau, which made no sense. There were no goods, no inventory, just wires, just money. That same afternoon, Hector called an old contact, someone who used to work in risk compliance for a regional bank in Santa Fe. "I need eyes on transfers between Sable Bay and any political committees between January and June 2022, Hector said. The voice on the other end was skeptical. "You know, I can't just hand that over. I'm not asking for account numbers," Hector replied, "just patterns, names, a few flags." The line went quiet. An hour later, the contact sent him a single spreadsheet, sanitized, no client data. But enough to light a fire. Over a dozen wire transfers, all under regulatory reporting thresholds. all sent within 72 hours of private events at Mar-a-Lago. One of them occurred just hours before a private dinner Melania reportedly hosted for select international donors. The dates matched Jasmine's timeline. But it didn't stop there. Hector found a company, Arbison Global Logistics, linked to the same Macau group. The LLC was registered in Delaware with a mailbox inside a shared office building in Dover. He made a few calls. No one there had ever heard of them. The deeper he looked, the stranger it got. The same holding group also donated $60,000 to a community development nonprofit in South Dakota. A group with no online presence, no known programs, and a board made up entirely of former campaign consultants. It was a trail. Messy, complicated, but very real. Hector knew he was sitting on something serious, so he reached out to a small online outlet known for taking risks, the Ledger Wire. They weren't flashy, but they didn't scare easily. He shared everything. Within 24 hours, the outlet published a story titled "Foreign Shadows: The Hidden Donor Trail Behind American Campaign Cash." Jasmine's name was in the first paragraph. So was Sable Bay. The article exploded. Even the major networks that had tiptoed around her claims now had to cover the story. CNN picked it up. So did Reuters. The Washington Times ran a cautious version, and suddenly Jasmine's claims weren't just viral. They were verified. Meanwhile, Karoline's office went quiet. No new statements, no rebuttals, just silence. But Hector wasn't done. He knew once the public caught wind of a scandal, the machine behind it didn't stop. It just changed shape. He wanted more, deeper proof. Voices on record, so he booked a flight to Miami. He had a name. A former aide who helped coordinate donor invitations at Mar-a-Lago. And word was, she wasn't too happy with how she'd been pushed out. But while the media chased the money, something else was happening behind closed doors. For 4 straight days, Karoline Leavitt said nothing. She skipped a planned fundraiser in Des Moines, cancelled a podcast appearance. Even her usually hyperactive social media accounts went silent. No posts, no press, just a void. Inside her office in Arlington, the atmosphere was tense. Aides whispered, phones rang unanswered, the blinds stayed closed. No one knew if Karoline was planning to double down or quietly wait for the storm to pass. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, she called a meeting. 5 of her senior staff packed into the narrow conference room. Karoline walked in wearing a plain, gray sweater, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She didn't sit, just stood with a folder in one hand and a water bottle in the other. "I'm going to speak publicly today," she said without looking up. Not a denial, not a counterattack, just clarity. Her campaign manager, a sharp and calculated man named Seth, immediately objected. "You say anything and it validates the claims. We don't need that." "This will fade." "It's not fading," she replied, "and I'm not going to pretend I didn't see what I saw." Another aide jumped in. "You don't need to defend yourself." Jasmine made it personal. "It's political theater." Karoline paused. Maybe, but it worked because it wasn't theater. That moment was real. She meant every word of it. And I didn't know how to respond because I didn't know what she knew. Seth sighed. "So what? You're going to apologize?" "No," she said calmly. "I'm going to tell the truth." The press conference was scheduled for 3 p.m. Eastern. No major outlets were invited, just local reporters and a few independent journalists who had been pressing for comments since the segment aired. Karoline stepped up to the podium alone. "I've taken a few days to think carefully about what was said last week during the broadcast," she began. "And after reviewing the documents that are now circulating, yes, some of this caught me by surprise." She looked up directly into the camera lens. "I was not aware of the depth of financial entanglements linked to that 2022 fundraiser. I wasn't in the room that night. I wasn't part of the planning, but I did defend the integrity of something I Didn't fully understand, and that's on me. No deflection, no shifting blame, just plain language. A few reporters exchanged surprised glances. Karoline continued. There are systems in place that reward silence, systems that make it easier to look the other way. I won't pretend I've been brave enough to challenge that before, but I am now. Within minutes, her comments were clipped, shared, reposted. It wasn't an apology. It was a pivot, one that left many wondering what she really knew and what she might say next. Some supporters felt betrayed. Others surprisingly stood by her. Even critics admitted she had done something rare. She'd admitted she didn't know everything. Later that evening, Jasmine sat in her living room watching the broadcast. She wasn't smiling. There was something in her eyes, something close to relief. Kendra, sitting next to her, nudged her shoulder. You think she's being sincere? I don't know, Jasmine said. But I think she finally realized this isn't just about party lines. It's about what kind of person you are when no one's feeding you lines. Karoline didn't follow up with more press conferences. She didn't run to the cameras. She let her statement breathe, and people noticed. Her approval ratings dipped, then stabilized. Some hardliners backed away. But new voices, independents, first-time voters, even a few left-leaning critics started engaging with her again. Not because they agreed, but because they saw something human in her hesitation. Because sometimes, the strongest thing a person can do is admit they didn't know. But Jasmine knew the truth wasn't done shaking the room. The story didn't fade. It evolved. A month after the broadcast, Jasmine Crockett was invited to speak at a town hall in Fresno, California. It wasn't televised. No media swarm. Just folding chairs, low ceilings, and a crowd of about 60 people. Teachers, truck drivers, retirees, students. She didn't come with a slideshow or a stump speech. Instead, she stood behind a scuffed wooden podium and told the story straight. Most of the time, truth doesn't come with trumpets, she said. It shows up in manila folders handed to you in a hallway by someone with tired eyes and a whispered warning. And when it does, you don't always know what to do with it. All you know is, if you sit on it too long, it burns. She talked about the silence in rooms where people should ask questions, but don't. About the emails that go unanswered because nobody wants to be the first to acknowledge a problem. About how the system, regardless of party, was built to keep things quiet and moving. People listened. No one looked away, because this wasn't about politics anymore. It was about courage. Jasmine never framed herself as a hero. She didn't act like she'd uncovered some massive conspiracy. What she exposed wasn't a scandal. It was a pattern. One that had been accepted, encouraged, and hidden behind handshakes and polite dismissals. After her speech, an elderly woman approached her. Her voice was soft, cracked by age. My husband used to say the hardest truth to live with is the one you didn't speak when you had the chance. Jasmine nodded. She knew what that felt like. Meanwhile, across the country, Hector Padilla's reporting continued making waves. A second article revealed more donor links, this time through an obscure nonprofit in Utah that funneled money through consulting fees tied to that same 2022 Mar-a-Lago gala. 2 resignations followed, quiet ones, no press coverage. But Jasmine noticed, and Karoline. She never said another word about the